Hey guys, what's up? Time for another episode of The Breakfast Club. So let's just get on with it. And I'm sorry for missing last week. It just wasn't working for me that Monday, but hopefully I'll make it up with this one. So there were several topics I wanted to touch on, and many of them like political. But then there was one that, while it's not as political, well, you see the title, and the reason why I want to touch on that is because I think it kind of goes into how I see information being delivered to people these days and how people tend to get really important things confused and focus on details that, while they may seem important and they are in their own way, they're not as important as the bigger picture. So we're going to talk about high fructose corn syrup. It's a rather controversial ingredient. I'm sure we can all agree with this. It's now gotten to the point where foods these days are advertising that they don't have high fructose corn syrup in there. Reason why is because I forgot what year this really began to be a concern, or at least it seemed to be a concern, but it was as far back as I say about maybe around 2010, 2012, maybe further back than that. People were starting to point out, they were pointing at the obesity rates, and they were talking about how much sugar people were ingesting. And please forgive me for not remembering this person's name, but there was this nutrition who was going around, and I think he had a blog, and he was also saying this on certain television spots about how you had to watch out for foods with high fructose corn syrup in them because it would be bad for you. If you're trying to improve your diet, try to limit your sugar, you're trying to eat healthier, you should stay away from things with high fructose corn syrup in it. And this obviously started a hullabaloo. First of all, you got the eat healthier type people who latched onto that immediately. You had of course, the corn industry who were not pleased with hearing that, so they put out their own ad campaign talking about, it's not that bad when eaten in moderation, and it's digested just like other sugars like honey or beet sugars, cane sugars, things like that. You started seeing foods advertising, like I said before, now they're advertising that they don't have high fructose corn syrup in there. I mean, there were some foods that were being made that it's just kind of ridiculous to have high fructose corn syrup thrown in, like bread, for instance. So, I understand when Europeans come over to the U.S. and they're saying that, your bread tastes like cake. I actually agree. It's something that gets on my freaking nerves. I have to be very selective on what breads I buy because of the corn syrup that they throw in. I can actually taste the sweetness because I've cut sugar out. I've cut a lot of sugar out of my diet over the years. So, but yeah, now these days you go into the food aisles, and while you'll still see plenty of foods with high fructose corn syrup in them, you'll also see a lot of foods advertising that they don't have it. You even got like the throwback sodas. You saw sodas before having as much sugar in them as 52 grams per can, and they're still pretty high. But now they're advertising, well, this time the sugar's not high fructose corn syrup, it's regular sugar, so that makes it better, right? And people fall for that, and they buy it. And that's what I want to touch on. Everyone's focusing on the high fructose corn syrup aspect. And they forget about why the high fructose corn syrup was a problem to begin with. The problem wasn't the ingredient in and of itself. It was the fact that it was being used in large amounts, and it was an indicator of the food itself, whether it was healthful for you or not. See, the guy, and this is why I really wish I could remember his name, because then you guys could look it up yourself. So maybe, hopefully, you can look up the issue itself and see what I'm talking about. Later on, they were interviewing him about the different things he said about how people should be eating healthy, and they touched on the high fructose corn syrup thing that he warned about. And he said that, people were misled because they were focusing on the high fructose corn syrup and not on his overall message. And his overall message was to stay away from processed foods. That was the real deal. That was the thing he was trying to point at. Processed foods, he said, was the bigger problem because they tended to be loaded with things that aren't good for you. it's not just the high fructose corn syrup, it's also fats. So there's debate going on with how bad fat really is. But you get like, the saturated fats. You got lots of salt, high sodium levels, that's a problem too. You get the fact that many of the ingredients are, the nutritional value is low, or they've been bleached out of them or something, or like leached out because of the process that they put them through. So it's a lot better to eat foods that aren't processed. Eat more raw foods or prepare more foods yourself. If you want to sweeten them, add your own sweeteners, add your own sugar, or add your own syrup if you want, but don't buy it with this stuff loaded in. And so you had people asking the rather stupid question, I think, well, how do we know the food is processed? I don't know. But he answered, well, let me give you a hint. If you happen to see in the food that it has high fructose corn syrup in there, that's a pretty good indicator that it has been processed. He was giving an example. See? This was like him saying, see, this here, that's the indicator that this is a problem. If you happen to see this in there, you know it's processed, don't eat it. But people latched on to the example. Oh, so high fructose corn syrup is bad, therefore stay away from everything with high fructose corn syrup. Which sort of had a desired effect, but not quite, because then the ingredient itself became the focus, and not the food itself. How healthful the food itself was that had the ingredient in there. So now you got people making the same crappy processed foods, but now they're just simply swapping high fructose corn syrup out and putting sugar in instead. And saying, see, now it's got sugar, so it's okay to buy. And then people are like, okay, and they buy it, and it's still the processed food that they're supposed to be staying away from. Because they were focusing on the wrong thing. And that's what I find kind of amusing and sad. That we keep focusing on the wrong things and end up in the same pitfalls. And we do this a lot. Not just with food, but with just about every freaking thing. We focus on a certain detail that, yeah, there's probably a good reason to be concerned about it. But that's not the underlying problem. That's not the main issue that you need to be focusing on. I'm just going to spitball some things at you to see what I'm trying to talk about. The high fructose corn syrup thing is one example. Another example with the gun control thing. Well, we got these people out there, we got these gun massacres. The United States has the largest deaths with guns. We need to do something about it. Let's limit this particular rifle. Let's limit this particular gun. I understand the reasoning for it, but what's the underlying issue? Is it the gun itself, or is it the culture that basically doesn't give two shits about life in this country? That's the bigger issue. Life in this country is cheap. Never forget that. Profits win over bodies every time. That's how policy works around here. It does. I don't care what your ideology is. You know deep down inside that's true. Human life means very little here. If you look at the actions and look at the actual deeds, look at how we actually function compared to what we actually say about life, and you realize, yeah, human life really doesn't mean much around here. And with that sort of attitude trickling into our culture, is it any wonder that, oh, well, this guy's bothering me, let's just kill him off. That's the underlying issue, but we won't touch that. We focus on symptoms. Or we can focus on another aspect. Poverty. People have all the different aspects that they think about poverty itself. What causes it? We don't want to focus on that. Focus on the little things, which they're not so little, sure. Like high fructose corn syrup, yeah, it's a problem ingredient. Sugar itself is a problem ingredient if you consume way too much of it, which is why you should be limiting that. But it's part of something much bigger. The food industry itself and the foods that they give us. That's another bigger issue that we should be focusing on. If you focus on those root causes, you wouldn't have to worry about things like, well, I got to limit high fructose corn syrup on my diet. The rest of the world doesn't have to deal with that ingredient, but the rest of the world, like other countries, they give their people more healthful options when it comes to the foods that they can eat and the snacks they can consume. And that also happens to be a part of their culture, how they eat the foods, the business surrounding it. That's the issue. We don't focus on that. focus on little things, it's not going to help us at all. Just about, and I am sure if you guys sit down and think about many of the things that bother us today, whether, health issues, the healthcare industry, gun control, the political upheaval going on right now with government, racism, um, sexism, all these things that concern us, the big things that concern us. Sure, the more you think about it and think about how we're trying to combat these things, the more you may start to notice that we're focusing on things that, yeah, they're important, but there's something underlying it that if we would tackle that instead, it would basically take care of everything else. But the main underlying thing is the thing that takes more effort to focus on. And so we tend not to do it. But we need to put the effort in. It's one thing to go, okay, I'm just not going to buy any foods with high fructose corn syrup in there. But to then go, I'm not going to get processed foods, which takes more effort. But what's going to make you healthier in the long run? Yeah. Gotta put that effort in, people. That's it. Not trying to preach. Catch you guys later.